Thank you, Steve. Landing a man on the moon captured the American attention in the 1960s, and I think it's fair to say, looking around the room and listening to this conversation, the appetite for space exploration is undiminished. And the question is, and the question we'll be answering today, what is it going to look like, and is it beginning now? I think we have a great lineup for this next conversation. Please welcome the Associate Administrator for Commercial Space Transportation with the Federal Aviation Administration, Dr. George Nield. We also have the President of Business Development for SNC Space Systems, John Roth, and the Vice President of Space Systems at the Aerospace Industries Association, Frank Slazer. Welcome, gentlemen, and back to the stage, Steve Clemons. Take it away, Steve.
So we're going to get to my friend in the far back, so don't leave here as we expand our panel. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Now we're going to talk about sort of a slight tweak to the conversation, which is the future of space exploration. And I guess, the first question I have is that as we've sort of looked at some of the efforts, the big efforts on, jet propulsion, reusable jets, and this, we've had a couple of big bangs. And I'm wondering what you sense the consequence of those big bangs are. George?
So spaceflight is inherently risky, and we know that. And yet people still want to go, and we're seeing a huge change right now in what the space programs look like. Used to be, it was all government all the time. Now we're seeing different things being done for different reasons. Different people are paying for it, and different people are going to be participating in it, and that's very exciting.
So is there a need for, as we're going out there, because when I lived at Cape Canaveral as a child, I didn't see any great disasters. I did see Skylab go up. I'll never forget that. But we had disasters in the space program way back. Do you think that the sense of resilience that we used to have in that space program needs to be reacquired? Has it diminished? And as you see things like the SpaceX blow up, do we need to have a tolerance level for the possible bad things that happen that we don't have today? And I ask this because you're in the FAA and you've got to think about what that tolerance level needs to be.
Absolutely. So we have a twofold mission in my office. First of all, to ensure public safety during commercial launch and reentry activities. And secondly, to encourage, facilitate, and promote commercial space transportation. So many people believe that society as a whole has gotten too risk-averse these days. But again, we need some context. Look at any mode of transportation. We lose many people in automobile crashes and motorcycles and trains and planes, and we're going to lose them in space. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't go. So we'll try to make it as safe as we can, and we'll go after it.
I want you to ask this lady's question here, who is in the green. Should you be the regulator of space? Are you the regulator of space?
We already are today by Congress. And so, again, what we're ensuring today is the safety of the folks on the ground who didn't sign up for those risky space flights. Those who want to fly on board the rockets are under a system that is called informed consent, where they have to be briefed on all the things that could go wrong, all the hazards, all the dangers. They could be injured, they could die. Now, do you still want to go, knowing all that? Sign here and have a good flight. So that's where we are today.
Frank, you're at the Aerospace Industries Association, so you are the representative for the commercial side of this. So let's put it to you for that. What do you think, when you're in that arena, would help propel space exploration and what we need to do to expand that more from the private sector perspective? Tell us what you're lobbying for. What are the deficits? What's not great?
Right. So I guess one of the things I'd observe is that, building a little bit on what George said, is that, in fact, industry's always been in space. The Apollo capsules were not built by NASA. You see movies like Interstellar, there's people with NASA uniforms on building spacecraft. It doesn't work like that. Never has. Most of NASA's money goes to industry, and industry works with NASA. Now what's happening is, in addition to industry working for NASA directly to do exactly what they say, industry is developing new markets. You asked a question about resilience a moment ago. Mm-hmm. At this point in time, we have 3 commercial vehicles under development to put people into space. We have 1 government vehicle designed to put people beyond Earth orbit. So we have 4 human-capable spacecraft under development right now. We never had that in Apollo. We had one after the other. And so to my mind, this is a really exciting time. The challenges we have is we're all kind of starved for money. I mean, the cool thing is that NASA, through their commercial cargo program for the International Space Station, found a way to leverage the ability of industry to develop launch vehicles and crew and cargo capabilities in a way that really gave them a lot more buying power. On the other hand, the problem is NASA right now is still, adjusted for inflation, below where it was in the mid-1990s in purchasing power. And so what we are trying to do at the Aerospace Industries Association, also with a number of other organizations, is push to grow NASA's budget over time, at least back to where it was 20 years ago. We were back to where we were 20 years ago. And again, using this leverage of going to the commercial marketplace to a greater extent, I think you'd see us have that 1,000 people in space a lot quicker than you would otherwise.
Let me ask you, Frank and John, a question that may seem a little strange, but it seems to me when after the Sputnik challenge, you had an unbelievable drive from people's garages, backyards, parks. Individuals came out. You had the things like the Westinghouse prizes, which have now become the Intel prizes. There was a sense that innovators and entrepreneurs could have a piece of that action. And then it seemed to, and maybe I'm wrong, seemed to become very mega in NASA, very big rockets, national security, putting a man on the moon was there. But I'm just sort of interested in whether we're getting back, whether we're seeing a disruption in the space sector that's getting us back where individual entrepreneurs can, at the micro level, have a real opportunity to disrupt the game. John?
Absolutely. Our company is sort of one of those companies that's been involved in the commercial space. We're building the Dream Chaser, which was a public-private partnership. But we track all the new startups in space because we want to tap into that talent. We want to tap into those technologies.
How many new startups are there?
There's over 100 that we track on a pretty much a daily basis.
What's the coolest one out there?
Oh, they had some amazing concepts. We had somebody pitch a giant rotating space station to create basically a 1G atmosphere in space, which has to be 1,000 meters across and rotate at a 1 hertz rate. And those are people that realize this is going to take billions of dollars to get that built. And right now they're just a small group of people that have that interest, but they're still pursuing it, and they're trying to find ways, how do we fund that through NASA, through public-private partnerships and other ways that we can do that. But there's also a dozen technologies that are coming out of universities, and those university students are graduating. They see the opportunity to get involved in space, and so they come to our company to try and market some of those technologies.
Frank, thoughts on that?
Yeah, much the same approach. I think if you look at it right now, it's interesting that so many companies are out there, but the other thing is it's a very American-led endeavor.
Right.
We have a culture of innovation in this country, of a culture of capital risk-taking. And you look at the Silicon Valley venture capitalists who created the IT world and created much of what is amazing in our iPhones and computers and everything today. That money, those interests are now going into space. And you're seeing these hotbeds around the country of innovation, of willingness to try things and sometimes fail, but sometimes succeed in ways we didn't originally think about. I'll give you one other example. I think that's really going to make a difference, and I can't even tell you where it's going to lead to. It used to be you'd work, you get a master's degree, you get a PhD, you might work on one satellite for half a decade or more before it actually flies. Now we've got college students, PhD students, high school students building nanosets, getting flight opportunities. One of the prior speakers mentioned the fact that these students had 2 failures. They're probably working on their 3rd or 4th successful one right now. And so the fact that people at an earlier point in their career, people like the students here in this audience, had the opportunity to think about what you can do in space, it's going to open the world up in a totally different way, and I think that's very exciting.
John, where's your company based?
In Colorado.
Colorado, so that's cool. These two are DC types. They're tainted and affected. I am too, but I should have asked the last panel, but I mentioned you guys whether, the role of the crazy idea. I'm always interested in when you're in something, that is broadening as this discussion about thinking about incredibly new ecosystems of opportunity out there that require huge investment. What does a crazy idea sound like to you guys? And I say that as in Washington, I think, I'm going to look at my Ellen right here from NASA. When I was in the Senate 20 years ago, Mars sounded crazy to most people that were in the legislative game in D.C. I worked for Jeff Bingaman, and he said we needed to go there, but it was not a popular idea, and people thought it was nuts. And so you live in a world where the nuts idea is a more ordinary thing, but it sounds difficult to get people to be enthused. Is that complicated for you? Do you
We
have a
don't-
hard
we
time
don't
at
think
parties?
of anything as nuts right off
Yeah.
the bat. We
Yeah.
will listen to any idea. One of the things that our company does that's gotten a lot of news is the veggie experiment on the station.
The veggie experiment?
The veggie experiment. So when they're growing vegetables on the space station, it's actually our company that does that. It's not NASA, like Frank said. NASA takes a lot of credit for things that industry does. But one of the things we're looking at is how do you grow food to go to Mars? Obviously, that's a big problem. You can't store enough food and water and other resources to take on a long journey like that. So we're looking at ways to utilize the entire interior of a vehicle where you basically grow veggies all the way around the walls, and you have a greenhouse out of your vehicle. And that also has radiation tolerance, so you can actually help your radiation exposure by having these veggies growing on the walls. And of course, on the Martian, he's growing veggies on the surface, and we thought that was great because that'll probably be our company that's helping to do that.
Frank, have you thought about this? I mean, because I think about AIA, and AIA is full of people who wear ties and whatnot, but do they embrace the notion, sort of the out-of-world notions? Do you have sort of Elon Musk types, Richard Branson types, Steve Jobs types? Because I'm asking this before I get to the real Washingtonian here.
Sure.
What the tension is between people who are really changing opportunity. Very frequently, a lot of those are in California and the West Coast and Colorado. And Washington is a place that doesn't typically, innovate. It's the regulatory spot.
There used to be a blog online that had a tagline that read, because sometimes the most important orbit is the Beltway. Now that's not meant to sound too centered on D.C. as being the center of all this, but what happens in Washington does matter in terms of federal investments, tax credits, how government regulates industry, how they regulate what we do in space. Even if government isn't paying for everything, it has an incredible, highly leveraged impact on things. You ask what's crazy, what do I think that's crazy? Almost nothing right now, because you can't think in linear terms anymore. Things are changing too rapidly. But I also would note that, in fact, our organization has over 300 companies as members right now, and we have a range from the established providers like a Boeing and a Lockheed Martin all the way up to Virgin Galactic and SpaceX, because they recognize that there is an impact in Washington on all these programs, that we've got to have a presence, we've got to have a voice, and as a certain president might have once said, stop them from doing stupid stuff and hopefully do some good things.
I think we need all kinds of companies, certainly to build the large rockets that are going to Mars and all the rest. We'll need United Launch Alliance and others with thousands of people working on that, complicated things. But there are some other things happening in space now that are benefiting from the entrepreneurial thinking. And one of the best examples of that is the new market of suborbital space tourism. We are very, very close right now to a situation where we're going to see that happening. Our office is working with about a half a dozen companies, each of which is in the process of designing, building, and testing systems that are going to be capable of taking people up to the edge of space, where you're going to be able to look out the window and see black sky and the curvature of the Earth and experience that magic
So everybody
of
can
weightlessness.
have a chance at the Scott Kelly scene, right?
There's going to be thousands of people who have that opportunity instead of just a handful of highly trained, specially selected government employees. I think that's going to change how we think about space.
In 20 years, what will it cost?
It'll probably be about the same as a fancy SUV. And, that's not cheap, but it's going to be within reach of many people.
Approachable. Can I have somebody run back to the back of the room? I want to ask Carly about this entrepreneur. There you go. I'm sorry, Kelly? See, my pen, I was holding too many papers here at the time, but thank you. So tell us where you are in this entrepreneurship side of things.
I work at Maston Space Systems. We're a vertical takeoff and landing rocket company based in Mojave, California. So we work with Dr. Nield and FAA AST. And, my comment to you on this was really just this paradigm shift. The coolest thing that I see about it as, a young person in aerospace is that a few years ago, 10 years ago, there were 2 games in town. And for an emerging aerospace grad student, if you're at a bar, you write down an idea on a napkin for something, what are you going to do with that? Today, you can call up any number of small companies and get a quote on what it would take to test and mature that technology so that it can fly in space. And I think that alone, more so than any program to encourage STEM, the ability to live it and read it in the headlines as it's happening is the biggest thing that can encourage growth.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You have reaction and thoughts about that? Because we have talked a little bit about, the other, you just mentioned insurance, and I know, Frank, you've been out there talking a bit about the Exim Bank and the fact that it's not shuttered, but it's not doing anything new, it's not authorized, it's not appropriated, and I hadn't realized that the Exim Bank, for instance, was so vital to so much of the space game, and you've been out there very actively on that.
Yeah, that's quite correct. I mean, people don't appreciate although space is a very big business, it's also a very small industrial base. And so if, as has happened already, 3 major multi-$100-million satellite sales for U.S. manufacturers, U.S. jobs are lost because of the Exim not being able to write new loans, that's thousands of jobs. And that's going to raise the costs for other programs, for government programs, for national security programs. It ripples throughout the entire community. And so, especially when everybody else in the world is doing this, maybe ideally, government shouldn't interfere in the markets, but every government does it now except for us. And so we are really at a disadvantage. We've got to fix that.
John, you've been out there, as I understand it, working on this spaceport issue, which I'm interested in because New Mexico was one of those a long time ago that said we're going to put a spaceport in, and I've seen now a percolation of other spaceports, and apparently you're helping everybody get a spaceport, right? So I won't ask you if there'll be too many because I know you'll say no, but what's involved with that? What do you need to have? What's the infrastructure that gets a community in the groove to become a smart, successful spaceport?
So the whole growth of spaceports is really fascinating to us. There's 10 spaceports now licensed, I believe, in the United States. Probably another half a dozen or so that are working on it. And internationally, we're seeing huge interest in spaceports. They're seeing what's happening in the U.S. and they say, oh, well, there must be a huge economic benefit for a spaceport. We need one too. So we have all these countries calling us up, and we're kind of unique in that we do an orbital vehicle, but it lands on a runway, which really all the other vehicles are capsules. We're the only orbital vehicle that lands on a runway. So we have the opportunity to work with the spaceports and actually have a vehicle that can go from an orbital mission, a commercial mission, and then land at their spaceport. So we have all these spaceports that are contacting us saying, hey, what does it take to land a Dream Chaser at our spaceport, and what do you think the economic benefits are? And it's really going to be tough to see. There aren't that many vehicles right now that can land at a spaceport and make use of a spaceport. So there's going to be a whole influx of these people creating spaceports, and then they're going to be basically trying to bid for all the companies that are going to be able to bring economic development to them.
And George, one of these other out there ideas which is intriguing is mining asteroids, which I know is a favorite topic of yours. How does that work exactly?
Very interesting regulatory structure right now. FAA is in charge of regulating launches and reentries. But what happens in between is pretty much a Wild West. And so the government is in discussions right now about, well, how should that work? Should there be someone overseeing that type of operation? And so we may see Congress come up with some of their ideas in the future years. But there are companies right now that are doing engineering designs and trying to attract investors to do things like asteroid mining.
To mine asteroids.
Exactly right. Now that brings up another key point. We'd love to see additional money for NASA, for the FAA, and so forth, but no matter how much those government offices grow, it's not going to be enough until or unless we get industry really engaged. The other interesting source these days is wealthy people. There are now, according to Forbes' annual report, 1,826 billionaires in the world today. About a third of those are in the United States. But if you go down the whole list, you'll see a lot of names that are familiar to those of us in aerospace. Paul Allen, one of the founders of Microsoft, was behind the Spaceship One winning of the X Prize. You got Jeff Bezos from Amazon.com with his own space company, Blue Origin. Elon Musk with SpaceX. Richard Branson, Suborbital Space Tourism, and Virgin Galactic. So these people are putting their money where their mouth is, making it happen because the government isn't doing it fast enough for their taste.
You know, I listen to you and I think how cool it would be in the upcoming many presidential debates to have a set of space questions and wonder how Donald Trump and Ben Carson and others might respond to this. I mean, they may respond in a very informed way, I don't know. But it would be interesting. Do you think that space awareness is getting to the point where it'll be seen as a national priority enough to make it into a presidential debate?
Maybe not. Yeah. Things like watching the movie Martian brings a lot of attention and so forth. But again, agency budgets is not the enabling thing. When you can go around and see neighbors and coworkers and family members having a chance to personally go in space, as long as they can afford to buy a ticket, that's going to be the game changer, and that is coming.
Thoughts on that, Frank?
Yeah, one thing I hope
you guys have the clout to get it in the CNN debate or something, right?
I don't recall that, but one thing I'll tell you is I hope what doesn't happen this time is what happens last time, which is in 2012. You might remember Congressman Gingrich, Speaker Gingrich, proposed a 51st state on the moon, and it wound up becoming a punchline on Saturday Night Live, and that was about the only mention of space that was done in the entire campaign in 2012.
Newt Gingrich suggested that the moon be a 51st state. I had forgotten that.
Yeah, but the thing is, what we're trying to do is try to educate the campaigns generally of how ubiquitous space is. You want to use Yelp, you want to find a restaurant, you want to find directions, you're using GPS. You want to go to the ATM and take some money out, you're using GPS time signals. I mean, there are so many ways where space is woven into the fabric of everyday life that providing a market that is rational for companies to invest in, providing regulations that make sense, that don't discourage people from making investments, and providing opportunities for young people to go into STEM careers, it's critically important, and we need to have that recognition.
Just before I go to the audience, I want to ask the three of you this maybe question about what drives this. And when you look at the images from Pluto, you look at the Mars rover Curiosity, the fact that we're building, as I understand, I'm going to talk to Ellen, a submarine to shift off into space and go explore hydrocarbon seas. I mean, this stuff is extraordinary. I was looking through the tweets from Scott Kelly from space and whatnot. It's an incredible array of things that are happening. And now the water discoveries of active water in Mars potentially. And so it all leads you to the life question of life beyond. How disruptive, cool, harmful will that be? John,
well,
you look so excited and ready for it.
One of the problems that we have is people get kind of jaded about the pictures. Like you said, to us in the industry,
I'd like to meet anyone jaded by those pictures.
They're incredibly cool, but people are so used to movies. Kids are used to movies. They grew up, Star Wars was back in the 70s. And so the whole idea of not being able to fly in space and go from planet to planet is kind of disappointing for a lot of the younger folks. It's not the same as those of us with gray hair that sort of grew up through the whole moon landing and that kind of thing. So, we were on the Pluto mission. We were on New Horizons, and so we get incredibly excited, and we see those pictures, and we have them posted on our doors and posted on our walls. And I go home and talk about it with my kids, and my kids are like, yeah, that's kind of neat, but I've seen that on so many movies that why is that any different? I said, well, this is real.
But there's a difference between the are we alone question, hypothetical, and the we're not alone question, not hypothetical anymore, right? Mm-hmm. And do you think we're alone?
Well, that's the big question. That's the big question. I think we'll find some sort of life on another planet.
I see. So we're not alone.
It may be microbial, but we'll find some sort of
Frank?
life.
I can't imagine that we're alone, and I can't even, perhaps being conscious, we're probably the only ones in the solar system, but I can't imagine. When you think about what NASA just found out in the last couple of years, you go in the night sky. We used to have theories. Well, maybe there's a certain percentage. They had this thing called the Drake equation, where if only 1/10 of 100th of 1% of the stars had planets, that would be billions of Earths. Well, guess what? You go out and look at the sky. Almost every star has a planetary system, and we're finding a number of them that have Earth-like conditions in terms of where they are orbiting their star. There has to be. It's just a question of how many and how soon will we discover them.
Frank?
So I think if you...
Sorry, George. My apologies. George?
Something that resonates with me was the opening of the Star Trek series, where they talk about the mission to go out explore strange new worlds and seek out new life and new civilizations and boldly go where no man has gone before. I think that really resonates with many people, and so we're on a quest to see if we can carry out that mission.
I can't wait to talk to Ellen about congressional testimony on that subject and how it goes. So we're going to go. But let's go to the audience here for questions and comments. We've got the great Lindsay Polloway here. Yes, this gentleman right here in the middle.
Hi, I'm John Hale. I'm a grad student in...
A little bit louder. Yeah. Great.
I'm John Hale. I'm a grad student in EAS. I'm curious about export regulations, ITAR in particular. Sierra Nevada is trying to market the Dream Chaser to foreign governments, and I'm wondering if you're experiencing any barriers to that because of ITAR and similar regulations. I'm also interested in the broader industry opinion and the government opinion.
Interesting. Export.
Well,
regulations.
export never bothers U.S. Industry and aerospace. Yes, it's certainly an issue in absolutely everything we do in space. It is getting better, I can say that. Just a few years ago, anything that had to do with space was automatically controlled by the international trafficking and arms regulations, which meant if you built a metal stand that was welded together to hold a satellite, that metal stand was ITAR controlled, and it was considered munition. So things have changed in the last year. They're moving a lot of things from what's called the ITAR list over to the commerce list, which makes it easier to export. What we've gotten the approval for in terms of the Dream Chaser vehicle and doing missions with the European Space Agency and with the German Space Agency, which we're both working with, is that once the vehicle is built, putting experiments on the vehicle, putting Europeans on the vehicle is all okay. It's not controlled by ITAR. The vehicle, once it's assembled, is considered to be a non-export item as long as it's under U.S. custody, which means our company, Sierra Nevada, is flying the vehicle or in control of the vehicle. So that's a big step forward. We can have partners that can build science experiments. They can be on the vehicle. They can monitor the science experiments, and we don't have to worry about ITAR. We still have a problem with actually selling the vehicle. We cannot go sell our vehicle outside of the United States. It is considered an export-controlled item.
Do you have in France, Germany, China, Russia, competitive Dream Chaser? Like an alternative
really,
for them?
Not really. At this point in time, in terms of lifting body, winged type vehicles that land on a runway, there's a few other countries. China is looking at developing, some other countries thinking about it, but we're really the only ones with a vehicle like that right
Frank,
now.
are you international also, your membership?
Well, no, my focus is principally domestic, but that often gets into the same area. I mean, I mentioned earlier, part of our job in Washington at AIA is making sure the government doesn't do stupid stuff. Well, putting satellites on the munitions list was one of the stupid things they did. And for about a decade, actually over a decade, that was in place. And meanwhile, the U.S. market share in satellites dropped from about 75% down to less than half. And now it's going back up again. But regulatory changes like that have problems for the country. The other thing I'd notice real quickly is if we're going to go Mars, we want to do that internationally. We have to be able to work together. Right now, when NASA is trying to put the service module for the Orion capsule, integrate that together, there's a lot of ITAR issues still associated with that, even though on a government-to-government basis, we've agreed to work together. And so, again, you need to really look at some of these rules and try to make sure they make sense.
Other questions, comments? Yes, in the very back.
My name is Ron Robinson. I'm with 3D Printing Tech here in Atlanta.
Cool.
And I'd like to know what role will 3D printing play in space exploration in the future?
Great question. 3D printing in space. John?
Yeah, well, it's certainly something that virtually every space company is looking at right now, both how to use 3D printing on the ground to lower the cost, and then, of course, Made in Space, which has a 3D printer on the space station. There's growing interest in, can we build things in space that will go then beyond low Earth orbit? Kind of the big challenge is you can only put so much on a launch vehicle. ULA does great launch vehicles, but you're going to hit a limit on how much you can put on there. So do you launch 10 launches to get enough in space, and then you assemble it all in space to be able to go deep space? Or are you able to actually build some things in space? And I've seen some entrepreneurial companies with some very interesting ideas at building large beam structures with 3D printing in space, and then assembling those beam structures robotically to be able to create very large structures in space. So I think over the next 10 years, you're going to see a huge growth in the use of 3D printing for space systems.
George?
I agree very much. If you can combine that with the ability to take advantages of the resources on asteroids or the moon, then you've really got something. To be able to just email up some plans and build to spec instead of having a warehouse full of spare parts, that could be huge.
It's so interesting. I see another movie script in my head of 3D printing right there. They should have added that to the Martian movie. Other questions, comments? Yes, right here in this corner.
Hi, my name is Philip Bram with Slim Salem Capital Group. I have a question about cube satellites, small satellites, and broadband internet being provided through cube satellites. I guess Google, SpaceX, they talked about, putting up 4,000 satellites.
Well, this is what Mark Zuckerberg wants to do too, to deliver more broadband to Africa, but to do it from space.
Right. But I recently came across an article about a company in the 90s called Teledistic. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but apparently they tried to do this, and they currently own, I guess, the rights or the license to do broadband in that sector. So given that, is it cost effective? Will it be able to happen?
So broadband in space. Now we'll start with you, George.
Absolutely, it's going to happen. There are several companies seriously pursuing that right now. Looks like there's a lot of significant benefits. There's a flip side, though, and that is if you start having thousands of very small satellites in space, it's starting to get crowded up there. So there's now discussion about do we need some kind of space traffic management to avoid collisions, to avoid creating new orbital debris that will make space unsafe for those who want to live and work there.
And what are the state of those conversations and discussions about that? Because the whole notion of navigating, we've had, I don't know if it's a cliche, but space clutter, and also when it comes to international trust, when the Chinese shot a satellite out of space, that certainly didn't enhance the cooperative, energy of the moment. So how hard is that to navigate to get to that point of beginning to think about some sort of international coordinating body?
The time is right. This is a very challenging issue, but I think people recognize that we need to do the right things. We need to have some kinds of rules of the road, if you will. Common sense. Want to make sure we're not too bureaucratic, we're not stifling creativity, innovation, and all the rest, but we want to do the right thing. So I think we're going to see something along those lines in the near future.
Frank?
It would be interesting to see how it pans out. I think eventually, yes, we will definitively have Wi-Fi everywhere on the planet. Just look at people walking down the street. You can't live without having your smartphone. Who wants to walk away from having that capability just about anywhere? It's also an opportunity to reach out and help stimulate the development of less developed countries by helping them leapfrog from the telegraph days or even before that all the way into the 21st century with Wi-Fi connectivity. So I think it definitively will happen. Satellites will be part of that process. The timing on it, I hope, is sooner rather than later. But there also are other competitors out there. There's actually a proposal I just saw Facebook applied to fly a UAV, a very high altitude, 60,000 feet, solar-powered UAV with Wi-Fi transponders on it that would be able to provide a similar kind of a surface, smaller footprint.
John?
Yeah, I think there's going to be some spectacular failures in the area, and some people are going to make money, and a lot of people are going to lose money because it's all about the cost. It's a commodity. People don't care if it's a high-altitude balloon that's giving them Wi-Fi service, or if it's a UAV, or if it's a satellite, or if they have cable, fiber optic cable dropped everywhere. It's all going to be a matter of having the service. So are satellites going to be the most cost-effective method to do it? I think it's yet to be seen.
So we just talked about 3D printing, big structures from the substance of Mars or, things like this, and broadband in space. Some of these things could have been thought about 15, 20 years ago as people imagined the outer edge of what was possible. Just as we wrap up real fast, as we think from this point in 2015, jump 15 years ahead, what is the out-of-edge kind of thing we should be shooting for, John? Or might be possible?
What might be possible? I think the mining in space is definitely going to happen. It's a huge capital investment, but if you look at what an oil company spends to go to the Arctic Circle to do drilling, it's billions of dollars. So the dollar amounts are not out of line with what's done terrestrially, what you might be able to do in space. And as costs come down, as launch costs come down, as you do manufacturing in space, you're going to start seeing some of these industries, which right now are kind of dreams, you're going to see them become reality.
Frank?
I'm going to go back to the future. About 30 years ago, a man named Gerard K. O'Neill talked about putting solar power satellites in Lagrange points orbiting the Earth and beaming power down to Earth. And back at that time, the thought was that'd be a way to overcome the energy crisis because we didn't have enough petroleum and hydrocarbons. Now the problem may be we have too much petroleum and hydrocarbons, and we're creating such a global climate change problem now. We've got to find some way to do that, get our energy without creating carbon dioxide, and that would be one very big candidate for the future.
George, final word.
There's certainly a lot of technical issues that we have to solve, but I think really the big challenges are philosophical and cultural. What's the role of government? What's the role of industry? Can we talk about democratizing space? Is that someplace that everyone can aspire to go to? And I think the answer is yes.
Fascinating. So the really big thinker at the FAA, you're very cool, much cooler than I thought you were going to be, George. So George Nield, give a round of applause to George Nield, Frank Slazer of the Aerospace Industries Association, and John Roth of the Sierra Nevada Corporation. This was a lot of fun.